Whatever. Complete the game on any difficulty. I didn't get an achievement for completing it on hard. I completed the whole game on hard. Alright, whatever. We did it. We did it. Alright, here we go. First things first. The bottom center of the screen says that we've beaten 104 games in 2023 and 426 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are now false. We've now beaten 105 games in 2023 and 427 since we started doing this in 2020. Okay, so yeah, I have some thoughts. I will start with this. I was half expecting this game to be bad. Based on the developer, which I knew very little about, and I don't think I'd ever seen a full trailer, but the few seconds snippets of gameplay that I had seen in like preview videos and stuff looked iffy, especially the character models. And so when those kinds of things are in question, you wonder about the production value in general, and you worry about the gameplay. So I worried about all those things. And based on my low-ish expectations, overall, I think I was pretty impressed. It's not the best shooter I've ever played or anything like it or anything, but it did a better job than I assumed it would at capturing how it feels to play as Robocop, which is both good and bad. One, the good side of it is Robocop can kill people like fucking crazy. You can basically insta-kill most of the enemies throughout the game. It's not until really late in the game that you start seeing enemies that you can't basically one-shot. So he's very powerful. He's also incredibly slow. Playing like this is nothing like playing fucking Titanfall or something where you're like wall climbing and you know, like sliding through people and sprinting. You're not doing any of that as Robocop. You are walking. And you are walking slightly faster. That's really all you can do. Mobility-wise, it's a nightmare. It really is. And it's frustrating at first before you get used to it, but it's pretty frustrating at first that you just can't really move. But anyway, it does a pretty good job of embodying that character, and it's probably tough to do that right and make it feel good, but they did a decent job. So, you know, as far as the combat goes, it's pretty solid. The way that it works is kind of unique. The way that it highlights the enemies and has the whole HUD like Robocop has in the movies, it worked pretty well. And the combat was pretty fun. It wasn't perfect, but it was clunky, but Robocop is clunky, right? So it was pretty fun. Considering the parameters they had to work within, I think they did a pretty good job with the combat. I was also impressed by some of the RPG elements in the game. Not only do you have a skill tree that has some pretty cool unlockable stuff on it, combat-wise, it's also got like dialogue choices that you can unlock and like hacking abilities and stuff like that. So, you know, if I had to choose a game that this reminded me of the most, it would be Cyberpunk 2077, because it's a first-person shooter. It's in this dystopian near-future thing, and it's got a lot of combat adjacent to like dialogue choices and, you know, relationship stuff with different people throughout the game. It's got a surprising amount of that. There's a pretty big focus on it, kind of like a Cyberpunk level focus on it. Now, does it go quite as far and as deep into those mechanics as Cyberpunk does? No. It doesn't have loot like Cyberpunk does. There's no loot really to speak of. You just pick guns up off the ground, kind of like Uncharted style. And there probably isn't as much of like a branching narrative option as there is in Cyberpunk, but there's some of it. Some of it's there. It's like Cyberpunk Light. You know, there is some of that stuff, and depending on if you complete different side quests and stuff, like, it's clear that I could have gotten better outcomes, because I didn't do hardly any of the side missions. It's clear I could have gotten better outcomes with some of the other characters if I had pursued those storylines further. So that's pretty cool. They didn't have to put that in there, and it works pretty well. It works. It's not perfect, but it's integrated fairly well. It works pretty good. It's decent. It is a kind of a cyberpunk-like experience in that regard, with all of the conversations that you can have, and like the hacking that you can unlock, and all that stuff. It's more like Cyberpunk than any other game that I can think of. There's no game that this is more like. So that was a pleasant surprise. And like I said, I think they did a decent job considering how slow Robocop is of making that fun anyway. They had to compensate by making him ultra powerful. And then again, toward the end of the game, it gets really hard because some of the characters do get pretty spongy. So you're not insta-killing people, but you're still slow as hell. So it was tough. A couple of the boss fights in particular were tough, hard. But they were fun. The boss fights there weren't very many of them, but the ones that were in there were tough but fair. They were, the guidelines were clear, and, you know, some of them took me several attempts, but they were all right. The environments, let's move on to some of the criticisms, because overall I thought it was a decent game. That's my overall decision. This is a decent game. It's a little bit better than I expected it to be. Criticism-wise, I have never seen a game... Well, so Robocop looks good, right? If you're just looking at him right here, he looks pretty... That's about how he looks in the game. And that's a live model, because you can see him slightly moving and stuff. And he looks pretty good. He looks just like they do in the... like he does in the movies. And so that was fine. That was good. I have never seen a game where there is so much of a gap between how high quality the environments in this game look and how low quality the character models are. This game has really impressive looking environments, very Unreal Engine 5 looking, very next gen looking, and even Robocop looks pretty next gen. And then the character models don't look that hot. Not only are their faces weird, it's just the way they're animated and modeled, they look weird. There's this one part where this guy's playing drums, and he's just like... There's some bad moments with the character models. They did not do a great job with the character models. So, you know, the graphics-wise, the character models were really suffering, especially in contrast to the environments. Because the environments looked almost exclusively great. And all of the visual effects with the HUD and everything with Robocop's HUD were all pretty cool too. But the character models did not look very good. The voice acting was pretty rough. Robocop's was fine, but Robocop has they got Peter Weller back to do it, so that would have been really hard to get past if they hadn't done that. And he did fine, but his Robocop delivery is so standard that it'd be kind of hard to fuck up. The other voice acting was not great. I didn't believe any of it, pretty much across the board. So the voice acting was maybe not quite so bad that it was distracting, but like lower tier. And you know, there were some parts of this game that were really frustrating because this game had an inherent flaw built within it, whereas because if you're going to make it feel like Robocop, you can't make him fast, so your character has to be slow as shit, right? And so to compensate for that, We talked about this a moment ago. To compensate for that, they just make him super powerful, which makes sense. It's consistent with the lore. You know, he's just not... I'm basically like... It's like you really have a gun and you're really shooting people in the head. You don't have to shoot them 10 times in the head before they die, like you do in a lot of video games. You shoot them once in the head, they are dead, right? And so you feel pretty powerful as Robocop, especially in the first half. But as the game wears on, they have to find a way to make the game harder, right? And so one way they do that is they throw more enemies at you, but really, you're shooting fish in a barrel. Regardless, you get 25 enemies coming at you at the same time. You just... And you can take a lot of damage because you're Robocop, right? You can tank these enemies. And so... later on they do a little bit more damage, whatever, but you're still like popping shots on heads all day long and still getting mowing through 25 people like it's nothing. So that's not, you can't really make the game more difficult that way. So the only other way really to do it is to make the enemies spongier. And so later on, without spoiling anything, most of the enemies, more and more of the enemies as you go on in the game, you can't do that anymore. You have to put 30, 40 bullets into some enemies in order to kill them. And you're still slow. And so there's this point in the game where it does become frustratingly difficult. Because you can't even crouch in this game. You can't run, you can't hide, you can't dodge. You can't even crouch behind anything. If you're going to find cover, it's because you're going to find something that's at least as tall as Robocop that can't be shot through, that you can run behind. And sometimes in certain situations, there just isn't that. So you just have to try and move and shoot and just hope that you do damage faster than they do damage to you. And so that's less than ideal. And it ended up in some frustrating deaths where it's like, well, what can I even do? I can't hide. I just have to shoot faster. And so that was kind of frustrating. But I don't know what they would have been able to really do about that, because it's baked into the formula. You can't... What are you going to do? Give Robocop roller skates halfway through the game? You can't do that. So it is what it is. Let's see what else. I thought the story was good. I'm not that familiar with I've seen Robocop 1 and 2, but it was 25 years ago probably, or more, so I don't remember the storyline, but it seemed consistent. It seemed like it could be consistent with like Robocop lore. There weren't any issues there. It seemed to do a good job of creating a story within that world, so that was all fine. Yeah, that's it. Just to recap, I liked the combat quite a bit. I liked that. I was impressed with the RPG elements, like the dialogue, unlocking different dialogue choices, and upgrades and stuff like that. And the game didn't always. On the other hand, the game didn't always look or sound that good, depending on what I was looking at or listening to. And the combat got a little frustrating toward the end. But not so much that I considered turning it off or anything, which I do sometimes, and I was playing on hard. And the only reason I played on hard was at the end, or at the very beginning of the game, it says under normal, it says if you want a slight combat challenge and focus on story with a slight combat challenge. Well, that sounds like story mode or easy mode to me. So I didn't pick normal, I picked hard, because if hard was like, if you want challenging combat. I was like, well, yeah, of course I want challenging combat. I don't want a slight combat challenge. So normally I play on normal, almost always, but the way this one was worded, it just didn't sit well with me to play on normal. So, and even considering all that, and me not being super good at games, I didn't have too much trouble. I only died 29 times. That's not too bad. So yeah, overall, I'd say 7 out of 10. It definitely wasn't perfect. It definitely had some flaws, but I was expecting a 5 and I got a 7. So I'm happy with that. Yeah, it was fun. All right. Last order of business. Robocop, it's been fun. Thank you for allowing us to play you. But we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye! Bye!